The Arctic holds its breath when death walks across the ice. In the endless white of the polar wasteland, where temperatures plunge to -60 degrees and winds scream like banshees through the darkness, survival is not guaranteed. It is earned through blood, determination, and an unbreakable will to live. This is the story of one young polar bear who faced the impossible and emerged as something the Arctic had never seen before. His name was Koda, though no human would ever know it. Born beneath the frozen cathedral of an ice den, he had known warmth only through his mother's embrace. Her massive frame shielded him from winds that could freeze flesh in minutes. Her milk sustained him through the polar night that stretched for months without end. But the Arctic is not a place of mercy, and fate has no regard for the young or innocent. The storm that separated them came without warning. Blizzards in the Arctic are not mere weather events. They are forces of annihilation that reshape the landscape and erase all traces of life. The wind howled with the fury of 1,000 demons, driving ice crystals like bullets through the air. Visibility dropped to zero. The world became a whirling chaos of white death. Koda's mother had been leading him across a stretch of sea ice when the storm struck. One moment, her dark nose was visible ahead of him, guiding him toward safety. The next, she vanished into the screaming void. He called for her with desperate cries that were swallowed instantly by the wind. He stumbled forward, his small paws slipping on ice that had become as treacherous as broken glass. But she was gone, claimed by the storm, or driven so far away that finding her again would be impossible. When the blizzard finally exhausted itself 3 days later, Koda emerged from a snowdrift where he had taken shelter. The landscape around him was alien, transformed by the storm into something unrecognizable. Mountains of snow had appeared overnight. Familiar landmarks had been erased. The ice beneath his feet groaned and shifted with currents he could not understand. At 4 months old, Koda weighed barely 50 pounds. His fur, still carrying the softness of youth, provided little protection against the brutal cold. His mother had been teaching him to hunt, but those lessons were incomplete. He knew the theory of waiting at breathing holes for seals to surface. He understood that patience was required. But theory and practice are separated by an ocean of blood and failure. The first week alone tested every fiber of his being. Hunger gnawed at his stomach like a living creature. The Arctic offers no vegetation, no berries, no easy meals for the desperate. Here, you hunt or you die. There is no middle ground between predator and victim. Koda approached his first breathing hole with the clumsy enthusiasm of youth. He had watched his mother position herself with perfect stillness, her massive paws ready to strike the moment a seal's black nose broke the surface. But watching and doing are different languages entirely. His restless energy betrayed him. His shuffling paws sent vibrations through the ice. When a ringed seal finally appeared, Koda's inexperienced lunge sent him crashing into the hole while his prey vanished into the black water below. The failure stung worse than the Arctic wind. He tried again at another hole, forcing himself to remain motionless for hours. His muscles cramped from the cold. Ice crystals formed on his whiskers and eyelashes. But no seal came. The breathing holes that had once seemed abundant now appeared empty and mocking. Days blurred into nights as Koda's strength began to ebb. The fat reserves that should have sustained him through learning were melting away. His ribs became visible beneath his increasingly matted fur. His movements grew sluggish, weighed down by exhaustion in the relentless cold that seeped into his bones. The Arctic showed no pity for his struggle. Temperatures dropped even further as the polar night deepened. The aurora borealis painted the sky in sheets of green and gold, beautiful but cold as death itself. Stars wheeled overhead in patterns that meant nothing to a starving bear cub. The ice beneath him cracked and groaned with the voices of giants, reminding him constantly that even solid ground was temporary in this frozen wasteland. On the 10th day alone, Koda made a discovery that would change everything. Following a scent carried on the wind, he stumbled across the carcass of a bearded seal. The massive animal had been killed by an adult polar bear days earlier, its remains partially buried in windblown snow. Most of the meat was gone, picked clean by Arctic foxes and ravens. But buried beneath layers of ice and snow, Koda found scraps of blubber still clinging to the bones. The taste of fat and protein flooded his system like fire. Energy surged through his weakened muscles. For the first time since the storm, hope flickered in his chest. But the meal was small, barely enough to sustain him for another day. He needed to learn, and he needed to learn quickly. That night, as wind whistled across the barren landscape, Koda made a decision that would define his survival. Instead of continuing his futile attempts at breathing holes, he would become something different. Something the Arctic had not seen before. He began to hunt the hunters. Arctic foxes, sleek and silver, followed polar bears to scavenge from their kills. But foxes were also prey, and they were careless when feeding. Koda studied their movements, learning their patterns. He discovered that hunger made him quieter, more focused. Desperation sharpened his senses until he could hear the rustle of fur against snow from 50 yards away. His first successful hunt was clumsy but effective. A young fox, distracted by the scent of seal remains, failed to notice Koda's approach until it was too late. The chase was brief, ending when the fox stumbled in deep snow and Koda's jaws closed around its neck. The meat was lean but nourishing, and more importantly, it proved that survival was possible. But the Arctic is never satisfied with small victories. As Koda fed on his kill, the wind began to rise again. Snow swirled around him in familiar patterns that spoke of another approaching storm. The temperature dropped so rapidly that his breath crystallized before it could escape his mouth. Ice formed on his fur faster than his body heat could melt it. This storm would be different from the first. This time, he had no mother to shield him from its fury. This time, he faced the full wrath of the polar wilderness alone. The wind built to a howling crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ice shelf. Snow began to fall in thick, choking curtains that erased the world beyond his immediate vicinity. Koda pressed himself against a ridge of ice, seeking any shelter from the driving wind. But the storm found him anyway, wrapping around him like the embrace of death itself. Ice crystals cut at his exposed nose and eyes. The cold penetrated through his fur, through his skin, down into his core where it began to slow his heart and cloud his thoughts. As the blizzard raged around him, Koda felt his strength ebbing away like water through cracked ice. His eyes grew heavy. His breathing slowed. The howling wind began to sound almost peaceful, like a lullaby sung by the Arctic itself. He was so tired, and the snow beneath him felt soft as any den. But deep in his chest, something refused to surrender. The ember of life that burned within Koda's chest flared against the encroaching darkness. His mother's blood ran through his veins, carrying the memory of countless generations who had faced these same killing storms and emerged victorious. The Arctic had claimed millions, but it had not claimed them all. Somewhere in the depths of his exhausted mind, instinct took control. He forced his eyes open against the stinging snow. The world was a blur of white chaos, but through the storm, he caught a glimpse of something darker against the ice. A formation of rocks, weathered black stone that had stood against Arctic fury for millennia. Shelter. If he could reach it, he might survive the night. Each step toward the rocks was a battle against wind that tried to tear him from the ice. Snow piled against his legs with every movement, threatening to bury him alive. His paws slipped on ice made treacherous by the storm, sending him sprawling across the frozen surface. Blood froze instantly on his scraped nose and torn pads. But he crawled forward, driven by something deeper than conscious thought. The overhang between the rocks was barely large enough for his small frame. Ice had formed a partial wall on the windward side, creating a pocket of relative calm. Koda pressed himself into the deepest corner, his body shaking so violently that his teeth chattered like breaking ice. The storm raged beyond his shelter with the fury of a living thing. But for the first time in hours, the wind was not trying to strip the warmth from his bones. Dawn came slowly, filtered through clouds heavy with snow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed once again by nature's violence. Drifts 20 feet high marked where the wind had carved new valleys in the ice. The breathing holes Koda had been hunting near were buried beneath tons of fresh snow. Everything familiar had been erased, but something else had been revealed. The storm had torn away older snow layers, exposing patches of ice that glowed with an unusual blue-green color. Koda's nose twitched at a scent carried on the morning air. Salt, blood, life. The storm had cracked the sea ice, opening leads of dark water that steamed in the frigid air. These cracks were highways for seals, paths they used to travel beneath the frozen surface. And where seals traveled, they needed to breathe. Koda approached the nearest lead with newfound purpose. The lessons his mother had begun teaching him suddenly made sense in ways they'd never had before. This was not about waiting at old established breathing holes that every predator in the region knew about. This was about finding opportunity in chaos, reading the ice and water like a map written in a language only polar bears understood. The water was so dark it seemed to absorb light. Steam rose from its surface, creating ghostly shapes that danced and disappeared in the cold air. Koda positioned himself downwind from the lead, remembering how his mother had always kept the breeze at her back to avoid detection. His small size, once a disadvantage, now worked in his favor. He could remain motionless without the massive weight that made adult bears shift and fidget during long waits. Time moved differently in the Arctic. Minutes felt like hours as Koda held his position, muscles locked in perfect stillness. Ice crystals formed and melted on his whiskers with each breath. his stomach cramped with hunger, but he ignored the pain. Everything depended on patience. The seal appeared without warning, a dark shape rising through the black water like a shadow given form. Its whiskered face broke the surface, nostrils flaring as it tested the air for danger. For a heartbeat, predator and prey regarded each other across the steaming lead. Coda struck with lightning precision, his small paws slamming into the seal's head before it could dive. His jaws closed around its neck, holding tight as the animal thrashed in the water. The seal was young, perhaps separated from its own mother by the same storm that had claimed Coda's family. But the Arctic recognizes no kinship between species, only the eternal dance of hunter and hunted. The kill was clean and quick. Coda dragged his prey onto solid ice, his heart pounding with triumph and adrenaline. The warm taste of blood and fat flooded his mouth, sending waves of strength through his weakened body. For the first time since the blizzard had stolen his mother, he fed until his belly was full. But survival in the Arctic required more than a single successful hunt. As Coda fed, his eyes constantly scanned the horizon for threats. Other bears, older and stronger, would kill him without hesitation for his meal. Arctic foxes circled at the edge of his vision, waiting for scraps but ready to flee at the first sign of danger. Ravens wheeled overhead, their harsh cries echoing across the wasteland like the laughter of scavengers. The meat from one young seal would sustain him for days, but only if he could protect it. Coda began the careful process of caching his kill, burying portions in snow that would freeze them solid and preserve them against spoilage. His mother had shown him this technique, though he had been too young to understand its importance then. Now every lesson felt precious as gold. As he worked, Coda's ears picked up a sound that made his blood freeze, a roar deep and threatening, carried on the wind from somewhere beyond the ice ridges. Another polar bear, and from the power of that voice, a large adult male. The sound spoke of dominance, territory, and a willingness to kill anything that challenged those claims. Coda abandoned his caching immediately. He grabbed what meat he could carry and began moving away from the lead, seeking distance from whatever monster had announced its presence. The ice beneath his paws vibrated with heavy footsteps, each one like the beat of a war drum. Something massive was approaching, something that could crush him with a single blow. The bear that emerged from behind the ice ridge was a titan of muscle and fur, 8 feet tall at the shoulder, weighing more than a small car, with scars that told stories of countless battles won. His yellow eyes fixed on Coda with the calculating gaze of an apex predator. This was Nanook, the ghost bear, legendary even among his own kind for his size and savagery. For a moment that stretched like eternity, the two bears faced each other across the ice. David and Goliath in a frozen wasteland where only one could survive. Nanook's lips curled back, revealing teeth like ivory daggers. His roar shook snow from the nearby ice formations and sent Arctic foxes fleeing in terror. Coda dropped his precious meat and ran. The chase that followed was like nothing the Arctic had ever witnessed. The massive bear moved with shocking speed for his size, his powerful legs driving him across the ice in bounds that covered 20 feet at a time. Behind him, Coda ran with the desperation of the doomed, his smaller frame allowing him to navigate obstacles that might slow his pursuer. Ice cracked beneath Nanook's weight as he thundered across a frozen pond. Steam rose from his breath in great clouds that marked his passage like smoke from a locomotive. His roars of rage echoed off distant cliffs, promising death to the small intruder who dared hunt in his territory. But Koda possessed something his massive pursuer lacked. Desperation had taught him to read the ice like a book written in cracks and pressure ridges. He could see where the surface was solid and where it was treacherous. The same storm that had separated him from his mother had also taught him to navigate terrain that would challenge even experienced bears. He led Nanook toward a section of ice that looked solid, but had been weakened by shifting currents below. The giant bear's weight, combined with his thundering charge, proved too much for the compromised surface. With a crack like breaking thunder, the ice gave way beneath him. Nanook plunged into water so cold it could stop a heart in seconds. His roars of rage became bellows of shock as the Arctic Sea claimed him. Even a bear of his size and strength had limits, and the polar ocean was beyond them all. Koda did not stay to watch his enemy struggle. He continued running until his lungs burned and his legs trembled with exhaustion. Only when he was certain no pursuit followed did he allow himself to collapse in the snow, his chest heaving as he fought to catch his breath. The encounter had cost him his meal, but taught him something more valuable than food. In the Arctic, size was not everything. Intelligence, adaptability, and the willingness to take calculated risks could overcome even the greatest physical advantages. He was no longer just a lost cub hoping for rescue. He was becoming something new, something the frozen wasteland had never seen before. Wasteland had never seen before. As the weeks turned into months, Koda evolved into something the Arctic had never witnessed. The storm-battered cub who once cried for his mother was gone, replaced by a predator forged in ice and desperation. His fur had grown thicker, darkened by exposure and scarred by countless encounters with death. His eyes, once wide with innocence, now held the calculating gaze of a survivor who had learned that mercy was a luxury the frozen wasteland could not afford. The territory he claimed stretched across 30 miles of broken ice and shifting floes. Other bears gave him wide berth, sensing something different about the scarred young male who moved like a ghost through their domain. Rangers who spotted him from distant aircraft spoke in hushed tones of the phantom bear who hunted where others feared to tread, who seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish like smoke across the ice. But the Arctic was preparing one final test, a trial that would either crown him as legend or claim him as another casualty in the endless war between life and death. The ice beneath his paws began to sing with ominous creaks and groans. Pressure ridges that had stood for years started to shift and buckle. The sea was awakening from its winter sleep, and when it stirred, entire worlds could be swallowed in minutes. The breakup came without warning, as it always did. One moment, Koda was stalking a seal across solid ice. The next, the world exploded into chaos. Cracks raced across the surface like lightning, splitting his hunting ground into 1,000 floating islands. The roar of breaking ice drowned out every other sound, a symphony of destruction that shook the very foundations of the Arctic. Water, black as midnight and cold as death, surged between the fractured pieces. Ice floes the size of football fields collided with thunderous crashes, grinding against each other with the force of tectonic plates. Smaller pieces were crushed to powder between them, creating slush that could trap and drown anything unlucky enough to fall into its embrace. Kota found himself stranded on a floe barely larger than a house, watching his territory disappear beneath the hungry waves. Around him, the ice danced in slow motion, driven by currents that followed laws older than memory. Some pieces drifted toward open ocean, carrying their passengers to certain death in waters too vast to escape. Others spun in endless circles, trapped in eddies that would hold them until the ice reformed months later. The floe beneath his paws was shrinking with each passing hour. Waves lapped at its edges, stealing inches with every surge. The ice was soft, weakened by salt spray and the constant motion of the sea. Soon it would be too small to support his weight, and then he would face the same fate that claimed so many others who trusted their lives to the breaking ice. But Kota had learned to read the patterns hidden in chaos. He watched the drift of nearby floes, calculating angles and timing with the precision of a master navigator. The largest piece, a massive berg that could support a dozen bears, moved in a slow arc 50 yards away. Too far to jump, but perhaps not too far for a desperate gamble. The leap Kota made that day defied every law of physics and probability. With the last of his strength, he hurled himself across the churning water, his claws finding purchase on the edge of the massive floe as waves crashed around him. He pulled himself to safety just as his old refuge crumbled into the black depths below. Years later, Inuit elders would speak of the ghost bear who danced across breaking ice, who survived what no creature should survive. Scientists would document unusual behavior patterns in a scarred male who seemed to predict ice conditions with supernatural accuracy. But they would never know the true story of Kota, the cub who was left to die and chose instead to live. The Arctic had thrown everything at him. Storms that could tear flesh from bone, cold that stopped hearts, predators that crushed skulls with single blows, and ice that swallowed entire worlds without warning. Yet he endured, not because he was the strongest or the largest, but because he refused to surrender to the darkness. In the end, survival was not about size or strength. It was about the fire that burns within, the ember that refuses to be extinguished even when the whole world conspires to snuff it out. Kota had become legend not through conquest, but through an unbreakable will to see another sunrise. The Arctic remembers everything, and it will remember him forever. A testament carved in ice and written in scars that some things are simply too stubborn to die.